I found a walkie-talkie on a hiking trail. The person on the other end says they've been lost since 1978. Welcome to the Wilderness Protocol. There are protocols for the things we can predict. Storms, wildfires, rock slides. We have procedures for the known dangers. But there is no protocol for impossibilities. There is no manual for what to do when the orderly, linear progression of time itself seems to fray and tear like an old rope in the deep, quiet places of the world. My name is Liam. I'm not a ranger or a scientist. I'm just a hiker. Or at least I used to be. I used to find peace in the solitude of the mountains. Now I don't go near them. This is my report. This is the story of the radio I found, the voice I heard, and the horrifying truth that some people who are not lost in space, but in time. It was supposed to be a simple 3-day solo backpacking trip in the Trinity Alps wilderness of Northern California. It was my annual ritual, a way to disconnect from the noise of my life, the deadlines, the emails, the constant, low-grade hum of anxiety. For 3 days, there would be no signal, no screens. Just me, my pack, and the ancient, indifferent silence of the granite peaks. The first day was perfect. The trail was challenging, the air was crisp and clean. And the solitude was exactly the balm I needed. I made camp by a small, crystal-clear alpine lake, ate my dehydrated dinner, and watched the stars come out, feeling the knots in my shoulders begin to unwind. The next morning, I was hiking a lesser-used section of the trail, a high ridge that offered stunning views of the surrounding wilderness. I was about an hour into my hike when I saw it. Lying half-hidden under a manzanita bush just off the trail was an object that didn't belong. It was a walkie-talkie, or more accurately, a two-way radio. It was an old model, a hefty, brick-like thing made of faded, yellowed plastic with a long, telescoping metal antenna. It looked like something straight out of the 1970s. It was caked in dirt and pine needles, but surprisingly it didn't seem to be rusted or cracked. It looked preserved. My first thought was that another hiker had dropped it recently. I picked it up. It was heavy, solid. I brushed the dirt off. There was a small, faded label on the back with a name written in permanent marker. J. Anderson. Out of sheer curiosity, I fiddled with the knobs. I turned the volume dial, and to my absolute astonishment, the radio crackled to life. A soft, hissing static filled the quiet mountain air. The power light, a small red bulb, glowed weakly. The batteries, after what must have been decades, were somehow still alive. I almost put it down and left it there. It wasn't my property, but something made me hesitate. The hiker in me, the part that understands the importance of communication in the backcountry, decided I should try to use it. Maybe the owner was nearby, searching for it. I extended the long antenna, pressed the talk button on the side, and spoke into the speaker. "Hello," I said, feeling a little foolish. "This is anyone on this channel? I found a radio on the Four Lakes Loop Trail." I released the button. For a long moment, there was only the sound of the hissing static. I was about to turn it off when a voice crackled back. It was faint, distorted by the static, but it was unmistakably a human voice. "Hello," the voice said. It was a young man's voice, tinged with a note of surprise and relief. "Hello? Who is this? I can barely hear you." I pressed the button again, my heart starting to beat a little faster. "My name is Liam. I found your radio. Are you nearby? Are you okay?" There was another pause, longer this time. The static hissed and popped. Then the voice returned, clearer now. My name is Josh. Josh Anderson. My God, I can't believe this thing still works. I've been calling for days. I'm lost. I think I broke my ankle. I'm stuck." Relief washed over me, mixed with a surge of adrenaline. This was a real rescue situation. "Okay, Josh, stay calm," I said, my voice taking on the professional calm I used in my work life. "Where are you? What are your coordinates? Can you see any landmarks?" I don't know," he said, his voice starting to shake. "I fell down a ravine just off the main trail, near the old logging camp. I can see the peak of Sawtooth Mountain to my west. I'm in a deep creek bed, it's mostly dry. My map got wet and fell apart. I have been here since Wednesday. My mind raced. Today was Saturday. You've been out here for 3 days with a broken ankle. That was serious. Okay, Josh. I'm a few miles south of Sawtooth Peak now. It'll take me a few hours to get to you, but I'm coming. Just stay put. Conserve your energy. Did you tell anyone where you were going? Yeah, he said, his voice sounding faint again. My girlfriend. She knows I was hiking the loop. She was supposed to pick me up yesterday. Okay. That's good. They'll have started a search by now. Just hang in there, Josh. I'm on my way. Thank you, he whispered, the relief in his voice palpable. God, thank you. The line went dead. I didn't waste a second. I marked my current position on my own map, and using his description of being near the old logging camp with Sawtooth Peak to his west, I was able to triangulate a probable search area. It was a few miles off my intended path, through some rough, untrailed country, but it was doable. I could be there by late afternoon. As I began to hike, a few strange details began to niggle at the back of my mind. First, the radio. How were the batteries still working? Those old radios chewed through batteries in a matter of hours. For it to be working after 3 days was unlikely. For it to be an old 1970s model, that was impossible. But I dismissed it. Maybe he had put new batteries in an old radio he'd found. A retro hobbyist, perhaps. Then there was the old logging camp. I knew the area well. There was an old, dilapidated logging camp, but it was on the eastern side of the range, not the western side where he claimed to be. And the Forest Service had decommissioned it and torn down most of the structures in the early 90s. It was just a clearing with some rusted metal scraps now. How could he be using it as a landmark? Again, I dismissed it. He was lost, injured, and in shock. He was disoriented. His sense of direction was probably shot. The important thing was that he was alive and I was going to find him. I hiked for 3 hours, my pace fast and determined. The terrain was rough, forcing me to navigate by compass and topography alone. The forest here was dense, the silence deep. I tried the radio every 30 minutes. Josh? This is Liam. Just giving you a status update. I'm making good progress. How are you holding up? Each time he would reply, his voice faint but clear. He sounded scared but hopeful. We talked about his ankle, about the weather, about his girlfriend. He was a student at Berkeley studying journalism. He had come to the mountains to write a story about the lure of the wild. A bitter irony, I thought. It was during one of these calls that he said something that made me stop dead in my tracks. I'm just so glad President Carter signed the Wilderness Act last year, he said, his voice full of youthful idealism. Keeping places like this wild forever, it's important, you know? I stood frozen, the radio held to my ear. President Carter. The Wilderness Act of 1964 was signed by Johnson. Carter had signed expansions to it, but the main act, that was long ago. Maybe he meant a specific local act? What year do you think it is, Josh? I asked slowly, a cold, surreal feeling creeping over me. There was a pause. He laughed, a short, nervous sound. What kind of question is that? It's 1978, man. October of 78. Are you feeling okay? The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The trees around me, the rocks, the very air itself suddenly felt alien and wrong. I looked at the radio in my hand, the faded yellow plastic, the simple analog dials, the name J. Anderson, and I looked at my own GPS watch, at the digital display that clearly read the current date. It wasn't his radio I had found. It was a ghost, a relic. And I was talking to a man who was lost, not just in the wilderness, but in time. I was talking to a man who had been missing for over 40 years. My first thought was that this was a prank. A very, very elaborate and cruel prank. But his voice, the fear in it, was genuine. The details of his story were consistent. And the radio itself, it was a tangible object. A piece of the past that was somehow, impossibly, still transmitting. I leaned against a tree, my mind struggling to find a logical foothold. A radio signal that could cross 4 decades? It defied every law of physics I knew. But I was holding the proof in my hand. I had to make a choice. Do I tell him the truth? Do I tell a man who is injured, alone, and terrified that he has been lost for 44 years? That the world he knows is gone? That the president he mentioned is a distant memory? That his girlfriend, who was supposed to pick him up yesterday, is now a woman in her 60s, if she's even still alive? The cruelty of it seemed unimaginable. And what would that do to our connection? This fragile, impossible radio link was his only hope. If I shattered his reality, would the connection break? Would I lose him forever, a lonely voice trapped in the static of 1978? I made my decision. I would play along. I would find him. And then I would figure it out. "Sorry, Josh," I said into the radio, my voice shaking. "Long day. Sun must be getting to me." "Yeah. 1978, of course." I could hear the relief in his voice. "Okay, man. For a second there you freaked me out." I continued my hike, but the world had changed. The forest was no longer just a forest. It was a place where time was thin, where the past was not a foreign country, but a neighboring valley, separated only by a layer of static. Every rock, every tree, seemed to hold the weight of those missing years. As I got closer to the area where I believed he was, I began to see things. Small, anachronistic details. I found an old rusted can of Billy beer, a short-lived brand from the Carter era. Then a faded M&M wrapper, the old brown color still visible, a color they hadn't used in decades. I wasn't just walking through space. I was walking through time. I finally reached the area he had described, a deep, dry creek bed in the shadow of Sawtooth Mountain. It was a treacherous maze of boulders and fallen logs. "Josh," I called into the radio. "I'm here. I'm in the creek bed. I'm looking for you." His voice came back, filled with a desperate, joyous hope. "I can hear you. Your real voice. You're close. I'm under a large, flat ledge of granite. I have a red backpack." I began to scramble over the rocks, shouting his name. The ravine was a mess, a jumble of shadows and confusing shapes. I could be feet away from him and not see him. And then I saw the backpack. It was red, just as he'd said. An old canvas and leather external frame pack, the kind I'd only seen in museums. It was propped against a large boulder, but there was no one there. "Josh," I said, my voice trembling. "I see your pack, but I don't see you." The radio crackled. His voice was different now. The hope was gone, replaced by a thin, reedy terror. "He's here," Josh whispered. "Who's here, Josh? Who is with you?" The man," he stammered. "The one who was watching me before I fell. The one with the quiet face. He was waiting for me. He said he was the one who answered my calls." A cold so profound it felt like a physical blow washed over me. I had not been talking to Josh. Not just to Josh. "What does he look like, Josh?" I asked, my gaze scanning the shadows around me. He doesn't," Josh whispered. "He's just tall. And he wears old ranger clothes. But his face, it's like it's not finished. It's smooth. Like a stone. He's been talking to me. He says the forest made a mistake. That I was supposed to be a permanent echo, but my signal was too strong. That you weren't supposed to be able to hear it." The radio went silent. "Josh," I called, my voice frantic. "Josh, talk to me." Only static answered. Hissing, empty and final. I stood there in the silent, ancient ravine, clutching a dead radio from another time. I had not been a rescuer. I had been an accidental eavesdropper on a ghost story. I had stumbled into a conversation between a lost boy and the thing that had found him. And as the sun began to set, casting long, distorted shadows across the rocks, I realized that the silence was no longer empty. It was listening. And now it knew my name, too. My decision to play along with Josh's timeline was a heavy one. Every word I spoke into that yellowed radio felt like a carefully constructed lie. A betrayal of the truth, but a necessary one. I was no longer just a hiker. I was the sole guardian of a fragile temporal bubble. My reality had to be bent to accommodate his, or his hope and possibly our strange connection would shatter. I continued my trek towards the coordinates I had calculated, a rugged, untrailed basin on the western flank of Sawtooth Mountain. The hike was arduous. The forest seemed to resist me. The undergrowth was thicker here, the game trails more confusing, as if the landscape itself was trying to protect its temporal secret. Every 30 minutes I would check in with him. "Liam here. Still moving. How's the ankle, Josh?" "Hurts like hell," his voice would crackle back, faint but defiant. "But I'm still here. Any sign of a search plane?" "Not yet," I'd lie, my heart twisting. "But they'll be up soon. Don't you worry." In these brief exchanges, I learned more about his world, a world that was both my own and impossibly distant. He talked about the upcoming midterm elections, about the new Superman movie with Christopher Reeve that he was excited to see. He complained about the price of gasoline hitting almost 70 cents a gallon. Each mundane detail was a fresh stab of surrealism, a reminder of the chasm of time that separated our two voices. As I got closer to the basin, the anomalies began. Not just the impossible radio transmission, but small physical tears in the fabric of my own time. I was pushing through a thicket of manzanita when I found it, a can of Billy beer, rusted but intact, half buried in the pine needles. It was a novelty brand from the Carter presidency, a collector's item now, but here it was just trash. Forgotten litter from 44 years ago, looking as if it had been dropped last week. A little further on, I found a footprint. Not a hiking boot. A waffle stomper. A Nike from the look of the tread. A design from the late 70s, pressed into a patch of mud that should have been washed away by 4 decades of rain and snow. It was a footprint from his time, preserved in mine. The forest was becoming a museum. I felt a growing sense of dread. A feeling that I was not just walking through space, but through a place where time itself was soft, porous, and bleeding through. It was during one of my check-in calls that the first real intrusion occurred. "How did you get into hiking, Liam?" Josh asked, his voice sounding a little stronger, buoyed by the hope of rescue. "My dad," I said, navigating around a large granite boulder. "He used to take me to the Sierras every summer. Taught me everything I know." "That's cool," Josh said. "My dad's more of a city guy. He thinks roughing it is a hotel without room service." We both chuckled. It was a moment of genuine human connection, a small, shared laugh across an impossible divide. And then a new voice cut into the channel. It was not Josh. It was not me. It was a deep, calm, authoritative voice, a voice that had the dry, official cadence of an old-time radio announcer. "The subject is establishing an emotional baseline," the voice said, as clear as if it were standing next to me. "Narrative contamination is imminent. Observe but do not interfere." I froze, my blood turning to ice. The radio felt suddenly heavy, dangerous. "Josh," I said into the radio, my voice a strangled whisper. "Did you hear that?" A pause filled with the familiar hiss of static. "Hear what?" Josh's voice came back, full of confusion. "I didn't hear anything but you." He hadn't heard it. The voice, the observer, had spoken only on my end of the line. It had spoken to me through the connection. "Who is this?" I shouted into the radio, abandoning all pretense of a normal conversation. The calm, authoritative voice replied instantly. "We are the monitors of the protocol. You are an unsanctioned variable. Your presence is noted. The J. Anderson echo is a containment failure. A signal that was not properly grounded. Your device has created a resonance bridge." "A what?" "You are speaking to a ghost in the machine, Mr. Vance," the voice explained, its tone utterly devoid of emotion. "A recorded memory that has achieved a state of interactive looping. It is not supposed to be able to communicate beyond its own temporal fragment." I was talking to a recording. A thinking, feeling, terrified recording. The thought was so monstrous I couldn't fully process it. Is he real?" "His fear is real," the observer's voice said. His narrative is real. Within his fragment, 1978 is still happening for him. You have now created a paradox. By answering his call, you have anchored his 1978 to your present. You are pulling his reality into yours. As the voice spoke, the world around me seemed to shimmer. For a split second, the dense fir tree in front of me was replaced by a younger, thinner version of itself. The air smelled faintly of sawdust and two-stroke engine oil, the ghost of the long-gone logging camp. The past was literally bleeding into the present around me. "What is happening?" I yelled. "The boundary is failing," the voice said. "The two timelines are attempting to reconcile. It is an unstable state. It must be resolved." "How? How do I fix this?" "The narrative must be completed," the voice instructed. The Echo J. Anderson was not simply lost. He was seeking something. A place he had read about in an old surveyor's journal. A place known as the Quiet Face on the mountain. It is a temporal nexus. A place where the different layers of this forest are thin. He went there looking for a story. The forest provided one. You must complete his journey. You must find the quiet face. "And then what do I do?" "When you arrive, you will be given further instructions," the voice said. "We are now piggybacking on your device's signal to provide a navigational waypoint. Your personal GPS should now be active. Do not deviate from the task. The integrity of this timeline sector depends on your compliance." The radio went silent again, leaving only the soft hiss. I pulled out my own GPS, a modern, rugged device. It had been useless for hours, unable to find a satellite. Now the screen was active, and on it, a single, blinking waypoint had appeared in a section of the park that was a complete blank on all official maps. It was labeled simply "The Face." I was no longer a rescuer. I was an agent, a pawn in a game I didn't understand, being guided by faceless observers to fix a reality I had accidentally broken. I had no choice but to follow the blinking dot. I tried to call Josh again. "Josh? Are you there?" His voice came back, weak and shaky. Yeah, I'm here." The radio went weird for a minute. "You there, Liam?" The observers were filtering our communication. They were allowing me to speak to him, but not him to me unless it was a direct reply. They were isolating me on the channel. "I'm here, Josh," I said, my voice heavy. "I have a new heading. I think I can get to you faster this way. Just hang on." The hike that followed was a journey through a fever dream. The forest was in a constant state of flux. I would walk through a grove of ancient cedars, only to look back and see them as young saplings. The very air would shift, one moment smelling of damp earth, the next of the cloying perfume of a woman who wasn't there. I saw flickers of movement in the periphery of my vision, a deer that was there 1 second and gone the next, a figure in a plaid shirt that vanished when I turned my head. The past was not just bleeding through, it was splashing, erupting in random, disorienting bursts. During this time, I kept talking to Josh. It was the only thing that kept me sane, the only constant in this shifting world. But our conversations grew stranger. He seemed to be forgetting things. "What was your girlfriend's name again, Josh?" I asked during one check-in, trying to keep him engaged. There was a long pause. "Her name," he said, his voice full of a strange, hollow confusion. I can't remember. That's weird. Why can't I remember her name?" He was losing his story. The echo was degrading. The observer's voice cut in again, for my ears only. "The narrative is unspooling. His personal data is becoming corrupted without a stable anchor. You are his only stable point of reference now, Mr. Vance. It is imperative that you reach the nexus point." I pushed harder, my fear for Josh now mingling with a terrifying sense of responsibility. I was his memory keeper. I was the only thing keeping his ghost from dissolving completely into the static. As dawn approached, I finally reached the waypoint on my GPS. It led me to a sheer, massive cliff face of dark, volcanic rock. I searched it, looking for a cave, a formation, anything that could be a face. I saw nothing but unforgiving, vertical rock. "I'm here," I said into the radio, my voice hoarse with exhaustion. "I'm at the location. I don't see anything. Wait for the sun, the observer's voice instructed. I sat on a cold rock and waited. As the first golden rays of the sun crested the eastern ridge, they struck the top of the cliff face. And the magic happened. Shadows cast by unseen crags and fissures high on the cliff began to shift and coalesce. And for 5 breathtaking minutes, the shadows formed an image. A colossal serene face, carved by the artistry of light and shadow. It was a face in perfect repose, its eyes closed, its expression one of ancient dreamless sleep. The quiet face on the mountain. I see it, I whispered into the radio. It's here. Good, the observer's voice said. Now look at the base of the cliff. You will find a fissure. An entrance. You must go inside. And you must leave the anchor. The radio? Correct. The J. Anderson echo is tethered to that object. To sever the paradoxical connection, the object must be left at the nexus. It must be returned to the timeline sync. But a toll is required. A trade must be made. An anchor for an anchor. You must leave something of your own. An object of equal or greater narrative weight. Narrative weight. A story. A memory. I understood. This was a place of exchange. I walked to the base of the cliff and found the fissure. It was a dark, narrow crack exuding a deep, ancient cold. I looked at the old, yellowed radio in my hand, the object that had started this impossible journey. And then I looked at my own pack. What did I have that held a story powerful enough to trade for a man's soul, even the echo of one? And then I knew. It was the only thing that made sense. I took the radio, and I stepped into the darkness of the fissure, ready to make a trade with the ancient, sleeping face of the mountain. The air inside the fissure was ancient. It was cold, still, and carried the scent of deep, wet stone and something else, a faint, metallic tang like ozone, the smell of immense energy at rest. The darkness was absolute, but it wasn't empty. It felt occupied. Like a room where someone has just left. I took a few steps inside, my modern hiking boots feeling clumsy and loud on the uneven stone floor. The outside world, the dawn, the force, it all vanished, leaving only the oppressive dark and the weight of deep time. The observer's voice came through the radio one last time, my radio, not Josh's. It was faint, as if struggling to penetrate the rock. Place the artifact. Make the exchange. The nexus will do the rest. We will not be able to communicate with you beyond this point. You are now outside the protocol. Good luck, Mr. Vance. The line went dead. I was truly alone. I fumbled for my headlamp, its powerful LED beam cutting a sharp, clean cone into the darkness. The fissure was not a cave. It was a perfectly straight, narrow passage about 50 feet long. The walls were smooth, almost polished, and covered in those same geometric, ear-like petroglyphs. It was a channel, a conduit. At the end of the passage was a small, circular chamber, no bigger than a large closet. And in the center of the chamber, on a natural stone pedestal that rose from the floor, was a single, perfect, and utterly impossible object. It was a fossil. The fossil of a human hand, pressed deep into the stone. But it wasn't just any hand. It was holding a walkie-talkie. A walkie-talkie identical to the one I held in my own hand. It was an ancient, petrified warning. A testament to the last person who had failed this test. The anchor must be replaced. A toll is required. An object of equal or greater narrative weight. The observer's words echoed in my mind. Narrative weight. The story. The emotional energy bound to an object. I looked at the yellowed radio in my hand. This was Josh Anderson's anchor. It held the last terrified moments of his existence, the echo of his hope and his fear. To sever his connection to my time, I had to offer a story of my own. A story that was equally or more potent. My mind raced through my possessions. My expensive GPS watch? A tool. My knife? An object. They had no story, no soul. But in the front pocket of my pack, wrapped in a waterproof bag, was the one thing I carried with me on every trip. The one thing that defined my own narrative of loss and love. My hands trembling, I pulled it out. It was a small silver locket. It wasn't ornate. It was simple, worn smooth with years of touch. I opened it. On one side was a tiny, faded photograph of my wife, Maria. Her smile was radiant, full of a life that had been stolen by a cancer that had torn through her with merciless speed 2 years ago. On the other side, a tiny curl of her dark hair was sealed beneath the glass. This was not just an object. This was the epicenter of my grief. It was the anchor of my own personal ghost story. It held more narrative weight than anything else in my world. I stood before the stone pedestal, the fossilized hand a grim reminder of the stakes. I took a deep breath. "Okay, Josh," I whispered into the quiet chamber. "I don't know if you can hear me. I don't know if you're a ghost or a recording or just a sad echo. But your story is over. You deserve to be quiet." I placed his radio, the yellow plastic relic from 1978, gently on the stone pedestal, next to the fossil. Then I held my locket. I looked at Maria's smiling face one last time. I felt a wave of grief so profound it almost brought me to my knees. It was the last piece of her I had. It was my connection to the life we had shared. And I was about to offer it to this cold, ancient place. "A trade is a trade," I said, my voice hoarse. "A story for a story." I placed the locket on the pedestal beside the radio. For a long moment nothing happened. The chamber remained silent still. I started to think I had failed, that my grief wasn't a powerful enough currency. And then a low hum began to fill the chamber. It emanated from the stone pedestal itself. The air grew cold, the metallic scent of ozone intensified. The petroglyphs on the walls began to glow with a soft blue light. The fossilized hand on the pedestal seemed to darken. The radio beside it began to vibrate, its plastic casing creaking. Then with a soft sighing sound it began to crumble. It didn't break. It just disintegrated, turning into a fine, gray dust that settled on the stone before vanishing completely. Josh Anderson's anchor was gone. His paradox was resolved. His echo was, I prayed, finally silent. At the same moment the radio turned to dust. My locket began to glow. A brilliant silver light so bright I had to shield my eyes. I felt a strange pulling sensation not on my body but on my mind. It was a feeling of something being withdrawn. I saw a montage of memories flash before my eyes as clear as if I were reliving them. Maria and I on our wedding day. Her laughter as we ran through the rain. The feel of her hand in mine as we sat in the sterile white of a doctor's office. The gut-wrenching, soul-tearing moment of her last breath. All the love, all the joy, all the pain. The entire story contained within that small silver object. I felt it all being pulled from me, drawn into the glowing locket. And as the last memory faded, the light from the locket died. It just sat there on the pedestal, a dull, lifeless piece of metal. The photograph inside was now a blank white square. The curl of hair was a wisp of gray dust. It was just an object now. The story, the narrative weight, had been consumed. The toll had been paid. I stood there feeling empty, hollowed out. The grief that had been my constant companion for 2 years was gone. But so was the joy that had preceded it. The memories were still there like facts in an encyclopedia. But the emotional core, the part that made them matter, had been taken. I was a library with all the books, but the words had been erased. I backed out of the chamber, out of the fissure, and into the bright morning sunlight. The world looked different. Sharper. Colder. Less colorful. I made the long hike back to my truck in a daze. The forest was just a collection of trees. The mountains were just piles of rock. The magic, the mystery, the protocol, it was all gone, replaced by a flat, gray, logical reality. The men in the unmarked uniforms were waiting for me at my truck. The observer, the voice from the radio, stepped forward. He was a plain-looking man in a simple suit. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice the same calm, neutral tone. "You have successfully resolved the temporal incursion. On behalf of the protocol, we thank you for your cooperation." What are you?" I asked, my own voice sounding distant, unfamiliar. "We are the custodians," he said simply. We are the ones who repair the fences. Nothing more. You will be required to sign a series of non-disclosure agreements. Your life will return to normal. He was wrong. My life would never be normal again. They took the radio from Josh's backpack, which I had retrieved. They took my GPS. They took every piece of equipment I had. They were wiping the record clean. Before I left, I asked one last question. What happened to him? Josh Anderson. What was his real story? The observer looked at a tablet he was holding. He scrolled for a moment. J. Anderson. Disappeared in the Trinity Alps, October 1978. His body was never found. He was an only child. His parents passed away in the 1990s. His girlfriend, a Miss Sarah Croft, married another man in 1981. She passed away from natural causes in 2019. He has no living relatives. His story, for all intents and purposes, was an echo even before you found him. A story with no one left to tell it. He had been truly, utterly lost. A loose thread in the tapestry of time. And I had been the one to finally cut it. I signed their papers. I went back to my life. I still work as an engineer. I still deal in a world of logic and numbers. But there is a silence in me now that the noise of the city cannot fill. A hollow space where my most important story used to be. I am a map with a piece torn out. I don't hike anymore. I have no desire to see the wilderness. I know what's out there, in the deep, quiet places where time gets thin. I know that the world is full of forgotten signals, lonely echoes calling out from static-filled timelines. And I know that sometimes someone somewhere will be foolish enough or compassionate enough to answer that call. And they will be asked to pay a toll. And I can only pray that their story is not as valuable as mine was. Thank you for the completion of this report from the Wilderness Protocol. Time is not a river. It is an ocean with strange currents and deep, forgotten trenches. And some signals are not meant to be answered. The price of connection can be a piece of yourself you can never get back. If this protocol has been of value, please consider liking this video and subscribing for future declassifications. Be wary of the voices you hear in the static. Not all of them are from your time, and all of them are hungry for a new story.